This segment of WGCU's Local Untold Stories is underwritten by the Charlotte County Government Board of County Commissioners, Charlotte County Public Schools, City of Punta Gorda City Council, Charlotte County Airport Authority, and the Charlotte Sun.
We stand on the threshold of a new century. Our nation, glorious in youth and strength, looks into the future with eager eyes and rejoices as a strong man to run a race. Theodore Roosevelt, 1900.
By the turn of the 20th century, the United States had become a world power. The young nation's population had swelled with millions of new immigrants who transformed the country socially and economically. Growth was evident everywhere, including in the Sunshine State. On southwest Florida's coast, the town of Punta Gorda was bustling with activity. Tourism, the phosphate industry, commercial and recreational fishermen, cattlemen, and the shipping industry all had left their mark on the community.
In the 1900 census, you have people from 27 states and 16 foreign countries living in Punta Gorda, out of a population of about 900.
As Americans ventured into the new century, signs of advancements began to take hold everywhere. In Punta Gorda, modern inventions of the day started to make their presence felt.
The telephone company here came about 1901, and it was called the DeSoto County Telephone Company, and they built the exchange and the system. The telephones were typical of the era all over the country, and of course it was not automatic. It was an operator that you had to call and ask for the number, and then they would connect you to the number that you asked for. There were also rules about what you should do and what you could say on the telephone, and it only operated during certain hours. It didn't operate 24 hours a day. It didn't operate at night at all.
The telephone wasn't the only tool to make life easier. The invention of ice-making plants had revolutionized the fishing industry, making it possible to ship fresh fish to northern states by rail. Over time, several ice plants had been built in Punta Gorda, but in 1902, a corporation from Philadelphia launched a more ambitious effort.
They envisioned building an ice plant in conjunction with a fertilizer plant to use seafood or fish in the making of fertilizer and using the ice to keep it preserved until it could be processed into fertilizer. The operation was successful in the context that the building and the facilities were completed and functioned, but it was not successful financially, and it soon collapsed and was bankrupt. At the time, it was the largest plate absorption type ice plant in the world, and it produced ice cubes of 3,000 pounds, and whenever they started the plant and they accumulated enough ice that they set out in a block next to the plant, and it took 3 months for the ice to melt.
This fertilizer and ice plant didn't succeed in Punta Gorda, but other advances in technology did. By 1905, only 2 years after Henry Ford established the Ford Motor Company in Detroit, Michigan, the town could boast 2 locally owned automobiles. Yet in many ways, daily life was still lacking modern conveniences.
Before, you had central sewer systems in towns, large and small. People used outhouses, and there had to be some regulation about the having them cleaned out. So a tax was levied called a scavenger tax, which a person had to pay in order to have their outhouses cleaned out by the municipality on a periodic basis.
Even though indoor plumbing wasn't commonplace at the time, other areas of daily life were progressing rapidly. By 1904, Punta Gorda was no longer at the end of the railroad line. The trains now continued south to Fort Myers.
When the railroad was extended from Punta Gorda to Fort Myers, then the steamers weren't necessary anymore to carry the mail and the freight and people to Fort Myers because there are other means to get there. And with the construction of passable roads and automobiles, shipping by water was not as economically feasible.
During the first decade of the 20th century, cattle were still shipped from Punta Gorda and other ports along southwest Florida's coast.
As far as the principal era of activity in Punta Gorda for the shipping of cattle would have been between 1902 and 1908, when the herds of cattle in Cuba had been decimated by the Spanish-American War, and there was a cattle dock constructed here that was exclusively for the shipping of cattle, as well as the pens to hold the cattle until they could be loaded on the ships.
But by 1908, the shipment of cattle by boat from Punta Gorda also came to an end. Eventually, the town faded as a shipping port altogether. Yet other commercial enterprises increased, and a more diversified economic base began to develop. Agriculture, for example, became big business. Citrus groves had been planted in the area as early as the 1800s, but the industry really got underway after 2 severe freezes destroyed crops further north.
Those freezes decimated the citrus industry in North Florida, and it started moving south and located along the Peace River in this area, as well as the Caloosahatchee River in Lee County. That's when the citrus industry really was a major industry in southwest Florida.
Another popular crop raised in the area at the time was pineapple.
In the St. Louis World's Fair of 1904, the Punta Gorda pineapple won many blue ribbons, particularly the smooth cayenne, which was considered the delicacy of all pineapple grown in the United States.
But unlike the citrus industry, pineapple farming didn't last in Florida.
It was kind of a tricky business because a pinery might consist of 2 or 3, 4 acres, but it would grow enormous numbers of pineapple. But you couldn't continue to grow pineapple on the same land. You had to be rotated. So that was a problem. You had a problem with nematodes. You had a problem with competing with other countries around the world that produced a lot of pineapple, such as Hawaii. There were at one time over 20 different pineries in the Punta Gorda area, and the people were earning a livelihood growing pineapple. But by the 1920s, that had all diminished down to almost nothing. It was just difficult for the Florida pineapple growers to compete.
Although the pineapple industry failed in the Sunshine State, overall, agriculture, ranging from citrus to watermelons and vegetables, flourished. Another business venture that was common around Punta Gorda in the early 20th century was turpentine stills.
Well, turpentine stills were wherever there were pine trees, and there are a lot of pine trees in the south, and a lot of pine trees in southwest Florida. They were where you extract the sap from a pine tree, and then you boil it down, and you create a number of different products, one, of course, being turpentine. It's a hard work, labor-intensive, and whenever you start boiling that, the residue is very hot, very dangerous.
The fishing industry, tourism, and cattle ranching were also still going strong in the area. Punta Gorda's path to the future was influenced by several notable residents.
There was one individual, of course, that probably did more than any other to help develop it, but he first came here as a winter tourist, but then he discovered that this is where he'd like to live the rest of his life, and that was Perry W. McAdowell, who was from Montana and individually had owned the most successful gold mine in the history of the state of Montana, the Spotted Horse Mine at Maiden. And he came here in 1897 and made a significant contribution to the growth of Punta Gorda, to the quality of life of the people, and to the culture and to the entertainment.
Perry McAdow's wife, Marian, also made a difference. She experimented with ornamental plants and trees and was known to entertain friends with similar interests, including Henry Ford and Thomas Edison, who spent winters in nearby Fort Myers. Another local worth mentioning is Albert Gilchrist. He had come to Punta Gorda as a surveyor for the railroad and became involved in politics. He first was elected to the Florida House of Representatives in 1893. By 1905, he was the Speaker of the House.
At that point, he essentially devoted all of his time to running for governor in the election of 1908. He had a very simple platform, but it was one that had a general appeal to the public. His two opponents, one was from Jacksonville, John N.C. Stockton, the other was from Key West, Jefferson B. Brown. They were both prominent people and very successful in what they did, but Albert Gilchrist was a very popular person. He was a warm individual. He knew people on a personal basis. He was very generous and kind, and people identified with him.
Gilchrist, a Democrat, won the gubernatorial election. In 1909, he became Florida's 20th governor.
He vetoed more bills than any governor in Florida's history up to that date, and he was rather colorful in his speech and in his manner and the things that he did legislatively as well as personally. His mother, at least temporarily, was made the first lady of the state because he was not married, and she came to Tallahassee to serve as the first lady of Florida. That didn't work out too well because she was rather outspoken and took positions on issues that may even at times been contrary to those of her son. So she was sent back to Columbia, South Carolina, and one of his sisters came and became acting as First Lady of Florida. And at other times, there was no acting First Lady of the state, only Albert Gilchrist.
Albert Gilchrist served as governor of Florida until 1913. When he died 13 years later, the Florida legislature decided to name a newly formed county after him. In 1914, the world was on the brink of the Great War. On July 28th of that year, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia after the assassination of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo. World War I had begun. And though the U.S. didn't enter the war until 1917, its effects could still be felt across the nation.
World War I affected virtually every community in Florida and the country to some extent. There weren't the infusion of military bases in World War I built in Florida as there were in World War II by any means. But every community sent their share of men into the military. Some of the effect, though, was there was an embargo on travel so that many things couldn't be shipped. You had also an epidemic of major proportions of influenza that took the lives of many people in the country during World War I.
By 1918, the war to end all wars was finally over. And with that, the balance of power in the world, both politically and economically, has shifted, with the United States coming out on top. The Roaring Twenties proved to be a period of great change in America. Women had finally garnered the right to vote, and Prohibition was in full swing. Closer to home, a significant change took place as well, one that had been years in the making.
The creation of Charlotte County was a work in progress for 34 years before it became reality. When Manatee County was divided in 1887 and DeSoto County was created from it, there was an effort made then to create a county that would include Punta Gorda separately from the rest.
That effort failed, but county division was an issue that would surface during every election. In 1913, the building of a new courthouse in Arcadia, the county seat of DeSoto County, infuriated those in favor of county division. They were upset because a tax was levied requiring all county residents to pay for the construction over the next 5 years.
From 1914 to 1919, which was the length of time of that bond issue, the emotions began to get hotter, and people became very angered over the fact that they were paying for a courthouse that they weren't going to use because they were going to divide the county one way or another. So they had the state senator from Punta Gorda and a state representative from Avon Park who were both committed to county division. So the legislature passed the bill that divided DeSoto County in 1921 into 5 counties: DeSoto, Hardy, Charlotte, Highlands, and Glades.
Consequently, Punta Gorda has been the county seat of Charlotte since 1921. A few years after the county division, Charlotte County would build its own courthouse. County division wasn't the only big event that took place in 1921. A hurricane, though minor, flooded much of the town that fall. And that same year, construction on the first bridge to span the Peace River between Punta Gorda and the community of Charlotte Harbor was completed.
Construction had started on that bridge in 1915. It took 6 years to complete it. It was a very difficult project for a small community to build, but it was a concrete bridge, and that was almost novel for Florida at that era. It was only built wide enough for 2 Model Ts to pass, and it was inevitable that it was going to be antiquated in a relatively short period of time.
The new Charlotte Harbor Bridge became part of the Tamiami Trail, a road under construction at that time that would eventually connect Tampa with Miami. Meanwhile, the nation's economy was booming, and people were investing in Florida.
It was a land boom and not necessarily a construction boom. You didn't see any large mass of homes being built, although some were. And in the Lee, Charlotte County area, for example, you did have some subdivisions and a lot of lots were sold, but there wasn't a large number of homes constructed. There were some of the largest subdivisions that have ever been platted in Southwest Florida, but they eventually went under. But many of the individual lots were bought and were owned by individuals even up to this day, and nothing has happened to them. They're just a vacant lot out in the field.
Over the next several years, land values escalated rapidly, and speculators were making a fast buck. Investors were buying land like it was going out of style, often sight unseen. But eventually, the bubble burst.
They were selling a binder for a person to buy the land, and then the person who bought the binder would sell the binder to somebody else. So, and it was escalating the value with each sale. There's no land change took place, but a person was buying the right to buy it at a fixed price. So you had that type of activity going on. It was very hot, very furious, and very flashy, and it didn't last long. And you know, what goes up eventually comes down, and that's what happened in the land boom of the 1920s. But it also was happening almost concurrently, but not necessarily, with the economics of the country. But we also had a major hurricane in 1926, which also contributed to the economic instability of southeast Florida, which also had a rollover effect on the rest of Florida as well.
In 1928, yet another major hurricane that cost the lives of thousands when Lake Okeechobee overflowed further slowed Florida's economy. Then, in 1929, the bottom would fall out of the U.S. stock market. Consumer confidence dropped, and consumption slowed dramatically. Soon, the country would enter the Great Depression, and Floridians, like Americans everywhere, suffered. Yet, despite the economic downturn, some growth continued. It soon became obvious in Punta Gorda that a new bridge was needed across the Peace River.
But at that time, you had a functioning state road department, and the road department then built the bridge that was completed here in July of 1931. It was named the Baron Collier Bridge. Now, it wasn't named for him really for anything he had done, especially for Punta Gorda or Charlotte County. It was named for him for what they hoped that he might do for the area.
Baron Collier was one of the most influential people in Southwest Florida at the time. The bridge, named in his honor, would serve Charlotte County residents for many years, until it was replaced with the current 2 spans across the Peace River. By the end of the 1930s, the world again found itself at the brink of international conflict. In 1939, Nazi Germany invaded Poland, instigating World War II. Its impacts would reach far and wide.
World War II was far more significant to Southwest Florida than World War I. Had an impact on everything. But you had rationing of food, you had rationing of gasoline, you had rationing of automobile tires. Travel was greatly limited. The headlights of automobiles even had, half of it had to be painted black because there might be German submarines in the Gulf that could be attracted by the lights of the west coast of Florida at night. You had civil defense activities where people were being trained how to deal with a mustard gas attack, how to identify airplanes, and all sorts of activities such as first aid that were being taught to the civilians. You had a lot of women who were married and their husbands were gone and they went to work because there was employment. So socially and economically it made a huge difference in the composition of the population.
Increased wartime production had helped bring the Great Depression to an end. During the war, there were 42 Air Force bases in Florida, including one in Punta Gorda.
The number of people stationed at Punta Gorda Army Air Force Base exceeded the population of Charlotte County at the time. The Punta Gorda Army Air Force Base had 2 fighter squadrons that trained pilots just before they went overseas and into combat.
Though Punta Gorda's population temporarily increased during World War II, while the service members were stationed there, locals say it was still very much a small town.
Main Street of Punta Gorda was 2 blocks long. There were lots of nice houses there. It was a nice, quiet little town. We went to town once a week, and that was to buy supplies. My allowance was 25 cents a week, and I could go to the picture show and buy an ice cream or a dime pocket knife on that.
Basically, the only paved streets were the then brick streets. They were Marion Avenue, Olympia Avenue, and then the crossroads between those starting at down from Shreve Street going out to Cooper Street where the hospital is now located. Communication was difficult. We had the phones, you picked it up and you rang the operator and tell her who you want. A lot of times you just say, "I want Mama." She knew your voice. That was a way that you could communicate.
I graduated from Charlotte High School in 1953. There was 21 in my high school graduating class. Now there's over 2,000 students at Charlotte High School in the top 4 grades, 9, 10, 11, and 12. And they graduate about 425 seniors every year. Big school.
Since the town's early days, wealthy tourists had been frequent visitors to the area. Many stayed at the luxurious Hotel Punta Gorda. In the 1920s, Baron Collier and Cornelius Vanderbilt gained control of the hotel and enlarged it. The name was changed to Hotel Charlotte Harbor. After World War II, the hotel was sold by its owner and turned into a spa.
And then it was only about 3 years that it was operated as a spa before it burned to the ground in 1959.
But visitors continued to frequent the area. With the advent of modern transportation, middle-class tourists discovered Florida. Some even decided to stay.
Retirement to this area and Florida in general came, of course, after World War II. And that was because of several factors. One was the availability of air transportation. You could get here quicker. Another had to do with control of the mosquitoes. Another had to do with air conditioning. And of course, the creation of Social Security, so that people of modest means could afford then to not just come to Florida for a visit, but to come here to retire.
To accommodate these and other newcomers, subdivisions started springing up around Punta Gorda and throughout the region in the late 1950s. Developers created Port Charlotte, Cape Coral, and Punta Gorda Isles.
You had people come in at the rate of sometimes 1,500 families in a month. The change became rather dramatic and sudden and continues to evolve.
The 1950s signaled the beginning of a growth phase in Southwest Florida that continues to this day. In 1940, only 4,000 people lived in Charlotte County. By 2000, that number exceeded 140,000. But this ongoing growth has its challenges. Over the years, community leaders have faced and continue to deal with the daunting task of accommodating this ever-growing population, while at the same time preserving the Florida that draws people to the Sunshine State in the first place.
To order a video of this program, call 1-888-824-0030 or visit our website at WGCU.org, and please refer to the program number on your screen. This program was produced for the citizens of Southwest Florida by WGCU Public Media. Show your appreciation for programs like these. Become a member of WGCU, a business supporter, or leave a legacy through estate or planned gift. Call or visit our website at WGCU.org.